been using for successfully collecting data. And at the end, again, we will have a Q&A session. So with that, Larry, I'd love to turn it over to you for an overview.
Okay, thank you, Marcella. I'm going to start by giving this overview and provide a context for what the barrier for collecting the barriers to employment, what they are, and why we're doing this webinar. Of course, as you probably know, collecting this information is required under WIOA, but it's a recognition in the Act that we serve students under WIOA, and especially in Title II, with students with potential personal obstacles that may affect their learning and progress. So the reason they're required is not just to have some additional information, but it's also to be able to make adjustments for your performance with the recognition that serving these students does take more time. They do often need more resources that you need to provide for them. So that's a basic reason why they're required. And it's easy just to say, oh, I'll just collect them and because I have to and do that, which of course you do have to, but I always see a data collection like this as not only a requirement, but an opportunity to learn about your students and to get more information about them. And what you can get from collecting these barriers or see, where are your students? Why are they coming and what are their issues, obstacles, and problems they may encounter as they work toward improving their skills or obtaining employment or moving on to other types of education. So it's a really good opportunity at intake to have a process where you can really discuss with the student their learning goals, things that might influence rather affect their progress, and then identify through that ways that you can help them and help address these barriers. So even though it's a little more extra work and opportunity, there's a great payoff to it because you can learn about your student needs and how better to succeed them, such as, for example, giving them additional services through partners or directly through your providers, and understanding what their things that may affect their learning. And to go back to the other reason why we collect these, it's it allows us at the federal level to make adjustments to state performance through a statistical adjustment model, which I think many of you have been working on this, especially state directors that may be listening, as you develop your performance targets for the next couple of years. So the percentage of students that you serve that have barriers is a factor in the model that is then used to adjust your performance. So that in the recognition, again, that these learners may take longer and may have a little more more challenges to meeting their achieving their goals. And so here, let me move to the next slide, and you can see that. Move to the next slide. Just a second, let me do that. There we go. What are the barriers to employment? There are 11 of them identified by the law, and these are the ones that you will be collecting, that you are probably collecting in your programs in your states. And you also could add to these in your particular state if you have other ones. But the 11 in the Act are displaced homemaker, English language learners with low literacy and cultural barriers, students who will be exhausting TANF within 2 years, ex-offenders, homeless youth, runaway youth, long-term unemployed, low income, migrant and seasonal workers, individuals with disabilities, single parents, or youth in foster care of age out of the system. And there are definitions to all of these in the NRSTA guide and in other places. But if you look at the NRST guide, we have definitions which come straight from WIOA about who these barriers apply to. And I thought I'd show you a little data that we've collected over the last 2 years on the barriers to employment. And one of the reasons we're having this webinar is we suspect that these barriers are not being fully reported within the states, at least by adult education. And how do we know this? Well, that's difficult to know because we've never really collected these measures before. We don't know for sure, but we suspect based on a couple of things. One, on comparing us with our partners in WIOA who also collect these data, and our numbers tend to be somewhat different and somewhat lower. Then if we look at just a few of these, just as an example, why we think that. For example, low-income individuals, if you look there, the third one from the bottom, you'll see there was about 320 or so thousand collected in 17 and 304,000 in 18. And we know that many of our learners are in that low-income category, and there was over about 1.2 million learners in 2018. So we suspect that 304 is too low given the size of our student population. And it's hard to know the other ones, but some of them do seem extremely low. And maybe they'll vary in states, but at least this is how it looks nationally. You'll see the change on the final column. Basically, those changes are due to general drops of enrollment between 17 and 18. So there are fewer students in 2018 than in 2017. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to those. But so basically, it's been about the same over 2 years, and we're hoping to see an improvement that shows a little more accuracy in obtaining these data. Not only, as I say, because we need it to adjust performance in a realizable way when we do the statistical model for your state, but also, again, to go back to our theme today, it will reflect better intake and better understanding of your students as well. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ruth Sugar, who's also on our NRS project, who will get us started on some presentations and state presentations. So Ruth?
So I wanted to
Ruth, sorry, I'm having some trouble hearing you. I don't know if you can.
Is this a little better?
Yes, that sounds great. Thanks for fixing that.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. So we've invited several of our colleagues to share their information today with you on collecting barriers to employment data and how to use information and the challenges that folks are experiencing collecting data and strategies for doing it more successfully. So as Larry mentioned, we have representatives from 2 states today. From the Technical College System of Georgia, we have Bobby Creech, Director of Instructional Services, and Kim Bryant, Instructional Services Technical Coordinator. And we also have Toby McGuire, Assistant Director of Adult and Community Learning Services in Massachusetts. So we know you're going to learn a lot of great ideas from them, different forms they're using, different technology, different strategies. So we're excited to hear from them today. So moving ahead, as Marcella mentioned, we're going to first talk about why should you collect data on barriers to employment. So there are a lot of reasons, as Larry mentioned. Some of them are to uncover the obstacles that make full participation harder for students or possibly affect their eligibility. So for example, if students care for a parent or a child with health issues, or maybe they face homelessness or they have ex-offender status, local programs may need to provide alternate delivery systems like distance learning or modified schedules, or connecting participants with employers who have greater understanding of these added limitations that result from the barriers, or programs that may select partners based on these additional social service needs. Also, collecting information just allows you to gain an increased understanding of the needs of the student subgroups through analysis of the barriers to employment data. So the barriers to employment are measures that can help you understand the impact that the obstacles may have on student persistence and performance. And by separating out students facing the challenges represented in the barriers to employment, you can identify whether there are differences in performance between students that have those barriers and those that don't. And this may lead you to recommend to your local program that they alter their program design, or possibly provide different resources, or select different partners to collaborate with. And then also collecting this information can show programs that they actually are serving students with multiple challenges. So this part of WIOA recognizes that there are subgroups of populations that are harder to serve than others, and that some programs will serve more of these participants than others. And in these cases, it's often more challenging for students to make significant gains and reach outcomes. So as Larry mentioned, performance is adjusted for the number of hard-to-serve participants with barriers to employment so that their outcomes don't have a disproportionate impact on the state's performance. But obviously, to make the case that you are serving students with additional barriers to labor market entry, you need to collect data. So I will turn it over to Marcella.
Great, thanks. And I'm just going to take a moment to remute everyone manually to ensure that we have we don't have some feedback like we were getting when you were speaking, Ruth. So just give me a moment. Okay, great, wonderful. So today we're going to be hearing, as we said, from Georgia and from Massachusetts. And so I'm going to ask Massachusetts if you could start us off by telling us a little bit about why you are collecting data. How are you using the data? What benefits have you seen? And you're going to need to unmute yourself again so that we can all hear you. So,
good afternoon. This is Toby from Massachusetts. Thanks, Marcella.
oh, okay, great.
You got me? All right. I'm talking over you. I'm sorry. Full disclosure, we are just looking hard for the first time at our barriers to employment data. We're in our second year of a new MIS, and the data this year is a lot more accurate than last year, and certainly across from the previous system. So we are now being able to look at it closely, and we're also able to differentiate how our local providers are doing collecting these data. So a little context, last year was all about learning the new system, the previous program year, developing, implementing new procedures, and that really disrupted a lot of things. And this year, we focused on accuracy and completeness. We expected to focus on barriers and going deeper into things, but we were just overwhelmed. However, we've been forced into an opportunity to start reflecting now even sooner. Now that we've got a full year of data that we feel good about, or pretty much we're calling this current fiscal year relatively complete in terms of the barrier information. We are going to be able to start off the new fiscal year probing that data, developing questions, and really we're going to do it at the state level, and we're going to encourage our locals to do it on their own. They have stakeholders, they've got interest, but really want to probe the data, develop questions, and come to a really a better understanding of our students, their needs, and how effectively our system is meeting those needs. And this is really true now because we've done a sudden shift in how we're delivering adult education. And there's a lot of experimentation out there. And for all the awfulness of this period, it is an opportunity for us to sort of expand and reflect. But we can really only do that if we've got good data. And fortunately, I think that we're in a place now. So our primary purpose this year coming up is to get our stakeholders to understand how quality data and diving into it's going to help them deliver their services better. We'll certainly add into that messaging the statistical adjustment model and how statewide performance is going to be affected. But our current thinking is to make the economics more about their doing their work better and serving their students better. So we also believe that and we're looking at this systematically so we can improve professional development. And we are just getting going on that, but that's where Massachusetts is. And I think
Great. Thanks so much, Toby. And now I'm going to ask our Georgia team to please share with us a little bit about how you are using the data and the benefits that you've seen there. And Bobby, I think you're the one that is going to be speaking, so I'll go ahead and unmute you. All right, Bobby, are you there?
All right. Yes, I'm here. Thanks, Marcella.
Perfect. Yeah.
I would say good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are, and I certainly hope you and your families are well. Since I see some of our Octane team on the call, I certainly want to emphasize that one of the primary reasons or how we're using the data is to submit good quality data as a part of our federal NRS reports and joint report. But beyond that, certainly we found that the information is very helpful to share with our stakeholders so that they have a clear picture of the students that we're serving and some of the barriers or challenges they face. This is data that we use for our state board, for our technical college system, certainly some of the other stakeholders like vocational rehabilitation, as we try to partner and work with them to ensure that our students are getting the services they need and the types of services and support that they need. It's data that we've shared with them. Our local programs share the data certainly with their local advisory committees so that they have a good picture, a good understanding, and can help break down those barriers and better support the program. Some other things that I think of are outside grants. It's good outside grants, so it's a good source of data for those. We have a partnership with Georgia State University. They have a federal grant, and we have used this data to share with them so that as they do their research and we partner together, that they have good solid data. Certainly our locals use the data when they're applying for additional grant opportunities. Some of the ones that I can think of are like the Dollar General grant, the United Way grants. I would like to say that there is a direct connection between what we collect on the intake form and what's happening in the classroom. I do think that our teachers do a good job of assessing students' needs and learning students, but oftentimes in our case, I think we have data entry personnel, intake personnel that are doing that, so that the teachers may not be as directly connected with our intake process, and so that may not translate as well. But we are using the data to inform our training needs around instruction. Carla DeBose and her team with professional development are using it to help with instructional strategies, and certainly in the areas of retention to look at ways that as we work with our programs to have strong retention efforts to develop out models that address these barriers. And then I think the final thing that I can talk about is really just we're using it internally from the system level to compare really what's going on from program to program. Are there programs that have high numbers or low numbers in certain areas? As we look at the demographics and think about what we know with those programs, what kind of technical assistance do we need to provide in terms of, or do we need training for those programs so that they're collecting better data? I think that's kind of captures the way that we're using the data, Marcella.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bobby. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And now I'm really interested to hear from our participants about how you have been using the data. So I'm going to make for all of us the chat box a little bit bigger so that we can see more of what you're sharing. So I invite all of you to share in the chat why you collect data. What value do you see in doing this? Perhaps beyond just, that's what we have to do. So take a moment to reflect and I'd love to hear what you think. So opportunities for co-enrollment with WIOA partners, right? If we don't have that data to share with our WIOA partners, it often makes it a little bit more difficult. Program improvement, yep, we can use data, this data to help us figure out how to better serve those students who perhaps are facing some barriers. Cheryl shared data should be used to inform the local workforce plan. Great. The story is in the data. Oh, I like that. Collecting data can help us make decisions. Nancy shared we have looked at data to make sure our programs are collecting appropriately, but we have not looked at it for the purpose of determining specific service needs. Great. And so now perhaps looking a little bit more carefully at barriers to employment, you'll be able to do that. We use the data in MS and the data management system to encourage, in Mississippi, to encourage integrated education and training program entry and workforce boards. It also helps communication with partners about who the learners are. Great, that's very critical. And using it for workforce board grants. Great. Well, I'm so excited to hear about all these great ways that you're using your data and how you see the value in that. I think that it's been very important, especially under WIOA, to help make those connections and see who is perhaps not getting served as well as perhaps they could be. As Cheryl said, I don't know that we're doing this, but it could help determine what wraparound services are needed. That's a fantastic way to use this information. Data collection gives a clearer picture of what is happening in the field and eventually provide technical assistance where needed. Great. We use the data the same ways, but also we look at these barriers and what effect it has for MSG, not just employment. Okay. By areas in the state, urban areas or rural, etc. Wow, that's really interesting. And I'm sure that that is helpful for you as well, for MSG and for your NRS data. Also aids in finding funding sources to meet the student needs. That's great. I'm so glad to hear that that's been helpful for you. Okay, so I'm going to, I hope that you'll continue to share other reasons that you collect the data. Feel free, I know the chat pod is a little bit smaller now, but you can feel free to continue to type in there. And I'm going to turn it back over to Ruth to talk to us a little bit about some common challenges. Ruth?
Thanks, Marcella. So that was great to hear about all the different ways you're using the data. And now we wanted to talk about challenges that folks are having. And Bobby did mention some, and that happens at the data collection level. And different people are doing it. So sometimes it's intake specialists, sometimes it's teachers. So there's a variety across programs, across states. So we just identified some issues that we think are common and understandable, and then we also want to hear, obviously, from our guest speakers and from you about other challenges. But a few that we came across are lack of awareness about the requirement to collect the data. So some programs may not be collecting data on barriers to employment because they don't understand that there's this current requirement to do so. It's a relatively new mandate, and some programs just may not have adopted the practice yet in full. There could be lack of familiarity with the category definition of the barriers to employment because they are complex. There's lots of features to each of them, and if staff are not provided with or aren't familiar with the full descriptions, they may not recognize when a student says something that reveals that they fall in one of the categories. So, for example, the low-income barrier to employment covers many eligibility conditions, and some could be overlooked by a staff member if they're just not familiar with what goes under that category. And sometimes staff may not ask effective questions to solicit the information from students. So if students don't understand the terminology that's being used, if the staff is just sticking straight to the language in the legislation, maybe a student doesn't totally understand what is being requested of them. So there could be some additional probing that they need to do if a student is just maybe saying yes or no to questions, or they maybe don't fully comprehend what the question is. So helping staff with follow-up questions to dig deeper, get more specific answers. Some programs may have outdated or incomplete intake forms and paperwork. So if intake forms and procedures haven't been updated for WIOA, these barriers and this information likely won't be collected in the correct way. So updating forms to be sure that the language is aligned with the current law will improve data collection. And then in some cases, data systems are incompatible, and so program software needs to be updated so that the categories are aligning with the electronic forms or hard copy forms, and there may need to update coding in the system so that the data entry staff are clear on what is being provided to them from the frontline staff. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marcella.
Great. Thanks, Ruth. So I know the challenges are often something that we all deal with. So I'm really excited to have our panelists share with us a little bit about the challenges that they've been facing. So let's see, perhaps this time we could start off with Georgia. Bobby, if you want to tell us a little bit about the challenges that you faced. And I know that you had a couple of samples that you wanted to share with us. So you can scroll when you're ready to look at those.
Okay.
Can
you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Thanks, Bobby.
Okay, sure. As I was kind of thinking through this, I was thinking maybe we should have named this section barriers to collecting barriers versus the challenges piece. But I can tell you that we, for years and years, have had a state-developed student enrollment form that we update each year so that each program has the latest information, and as we monitor, we certainly make sure that they have those. But I think some of the challenges that we have are really around consistency of understanding by staff and students. We do publish a directions and definition supplement with the student registration or student enrollment form packet, but still, and we provide training. Kim Bryant, who we'll hear from in a bit, does a great job of providing a tutorial that all intake personnel have to participate in. But there still seems to be everybody's own understanding sometimes, I think, is the difficulty. There are some nuances with the definition, I think, that can get people confused. So I think, again, one of the barriers is really around consistency of understanding. And then some of the wording, we've done a lot of work on that to try to address that. And I apologize, Marcella, you may need to advance it for me. But we worked a lot around simplifying the wording to ensure understanding of what is being asked. And what you see on the screen here is our iteration for FY19. So we did a couple of things. We made sure that we clearly identified they had to mark each thing either yes or no. We labeled the item, and then we had a question that would help to explain to both the teacher or intake specialist and the student what was being asked of them. So that was our first iteration of trying to address the barrier of helping people understand. And then on the next slide for fiscal year 20, we really changed the questions to statements, and we removed the standalone term at the beginning and integrated it into the statement so that it's not I guess we viewed that our initial effort could be somewhat offensive in terms of the labels. So we changed the questions to statements and removed those. So I think those are some of the barriers and a few of the strategies. Kim will talk a little bit more about some of our new efforts in just a bit, but that kind of covers what our challenges have been.
Great, thank you. And Toby, can you share with us a little bit about the challenges that you have faced in Massachusetts? And I know earlier some people were having trouble hearing you, Toby. So if you don't mind, I don't know if you can raise the volume on your phone or just speak loudly. That would be great.
Okay, great. I'm sorry about that. How's this?
Nope, no problem.
All right.
Great.
So as I kind of mentioned earlier, our primary challenge really has been the transition from one information system to the next. And with that, we had to sort of push down the road some of our data efforts. And the current fiscal year that we're in, we really focused a ton of effort on data accuracy and completeness. We actually cribbed the desk review process from a couple of states. Mike's on the line. His was helpful. Washington, D.C.'s, and a couple others as well. And that effort actually did translate, I think, into better barriers collection, identification. But looking at the data closely, I think we're still under-reporting. But at this time, what it looks like is that transition was the hardest thing for us to get where we need to go. And back to you.
Okay, great. All right, well, wonderful. So now we're interested in hearing from all of you, now that we've heard from our participants, about what challenges you have faced in collecting these data. And these are the 5 that we had identified, the ones that Ruth had talked about. But I know that there may be others. And so if you do select other, if you could share with us in the chat pod what those other are. And while you're typing that, I do want to draw attention to what Terry had mentioned earlier, that it's important to try and have the same staff at each program to go over information. They use Career Navigator to go over with clients when they're setting the career plan. And Nancy said that they strongly encourage individual meetings with participants to go over the barriers because it makes it a little easier when they're dealing with small numbers typically. And John, we'll come back to your question. Ariana said that one of the other things that they're dealing with are the perception that these were optional. Okay, so that might have to do a lot with staff training. Robin also has been dealing with a lack of motivation to collect accurate information. Wendy talking about misunderstanding of the categories across the board and how to relay them to students. Okay. Great. And of the ones that we shared, it looks like the most common one is lack of familiarity with category definitions that I think kind of aligns a little bit with what was in the chat, and ineffective questioning to solicit information from students. Okay, so I'm going to head back over to the chat a moment because it sounds like a lot of you have some other things that we had not included. In Tennessee, some clients are hesitant to share in fear of losing benefits or other services. Again, that relates to perhaps to the lack of understanding that someone else had mentioned. Staff understanding of the need to accurately collect was our biggest challenge. Okay. Oh, good. And I'm glad to hear that you're providing professional development around that. Category definitions, personnel did not understand why the information was relevant to them. so they didn't care if they collected it. Has not been a priority for programs who focus on other data elements. And Terry shared that they got with other WIOA partners when this came out to see how they'd been collecting and asking these questions. Oh, that's a great idea. So people that have been successful finding out from them, and that seems to help programs. Amanda said staff report feeling uncomfortable asking these questions. They seem too personal sometimes. Great. Yeah, I think that all of those are really critical challenges, and it sounds like a lot of you are facing the same ones. And I know that that doesn't necessarily make it easier, but hopefully it's good to know that you're in good company. And with that, going to turn it back over to Ruth to talk to us a little bit about strategies for successfully collecting data on barriers to employment. Ruth?
Great, thanks, Marcella. So you've hit upon some of these ideas as you've shared some of the challenges you've had and some of the ways you've addressed them. But we focused on some things that could be helpful in the orientation and intake process to improve collection of this information. And someone just touched on the student perspective. So we thought that helping students understand better the purpose of the intake and registration forms and why data are being collected is helpful, because if they understand the importance of the information, it may make them feel more comfortable to share details that relate to the barriers to employment. And if they understand, as has been mentioned, that the information helps teachers in the program tailor instruction better and track student progress better, it may make them more apt to share the information. And also, as was already noted, to help students understand that programs are required to collect the information so that it can be shared with funders, that the funds are being used in the way they were intended. And also, it's important for students to feel reassured that their information is actually confidential and that their personally identifiable information won't be given to funders or to others. And in feeling more comfortable that their privacy is being protected, again, they probably will be more apt to provide information. As has been mentioned, this process allows programs to assess student needs through the interview process. Staff can discover the education and employment and support services that students need to achieve the positive outcomes. And these conversations provide an opportunity to ask students questions about the impact of the barriers to employment on their daily lives and their challenges to participating in the program. And then also, it helps in identifying short and long-term goals. So as staff and students discuss their needs, they can help them decide what needs to be addressed immediately and what can go more in the long term. And so, for example, if a student is a recently displaced homemaker, together they can decide how programming can best address their most recent loss of income and how the program can help them. It, again, addresses barriers to participation in education and employment. So it could also uncover, in addition to the barriers to employment, other things that pose challenges like transportation needs or behaviors and habits that the students have that may interfere with attendance or engagement in the services, or specific learning challenges they have, in addition to barriers to employment like housing insecurity or their caretaker status, or if they have a record of arrest or conviction. And another thing that can be very helpful is identifying what support systems students already have. So if they have family or community members that can help them persist in programs in terms of attending or in completing their work and encouraging them through the process, that's very good to know. And also on the other side, to know if they have any gaps in their support systems that need to be addressed to make their participation more successful. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Marcella.
Thanks. So also, a lot of you mentioned that there were some issues with staff not being sure about, what these things mean, maybe not understanding the purpose of them. So some strategies that might help are providing the definition as stated in the law so that it really sort of drills in that they really need to be doing these things, provide a further explanation so that they understand the terms, they understand what these questions are that they're asking, establish data collection procedures, and pilot test them to make sure that they're easy for staff and students to understand and easy for staff to implement. So I think this sort of gets at the idea of, people, as Scott pointed out, they don't like asking these questions. Oh, sorry, Scott, I see that you were making a different point. But sometimes they don't feel comfortable asking it. So if you work with them on it and provide some training and have established procedures, that can help to address that. Developing a questioning protocol that will elicit comprehensive answers from the students and will get you the answers that you need, and develop observation skills within the staff so that they can identify any issues in case a student isn't forthcoming with the information when you do the interview. Perhaps there's another way for you to get that information. All right, and Ruth, if you don't mind, if you can cover or share with us some ideas for the infrastructure.
Great, thanks. So we talked about sort of a focus on students and then a focus on some staff issues, and now we're looking at sort of some bigger general issues. So designing the data collection forms and companion resources that include the definitions and examples and questions to assist staff in collecting more complete information, with which Bobby mentioned that they help their program staff in that way. Developing and implementing a quality control system for both the hard copy and electronic data, again, to ensure that alignment and that what is being collected is actually being entered into the system. And as has been mentioned by several of you, different professional development for both those who are doing the intake gathering of data and also those who are doing data entry. I know we're going to hear a lot of other great ideas from you that you all are doing on the day-to-day level with your programs and what you see happening on the day-to-day level for programs. I'm going to turn it over to Marcella.
Thanks, Ruth. So I'm going to ask Toby if you could share with us a little bit about what strategies you've found to be successful, and then I know we'll be having Ken come on to show us a little bit of what they're doing in Georgia. So Toby, take it away.
Thank you, Marcella. So this is, I got it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. We're going to be, this is our current paper template that we post for providers to adapt for their local purposes, and it includes the required fields and a few others. One of the things that we did that did make an immediate impact was we broke out that large barrier with English language learner, low literacy, culture barriers into the 3 subparts. So we collect those individually and then roll them up. And that we not only, of course, our MRS requires that you do get to these questions, but that you can't save the intake unless at least low literacy or English language learner is checked. So at the minimum, every student in Massachusetts for the past 2 years has to have one or the other indicated. We feel that's a solid strategy since this is basic ABE eligibility. In addition, if a student doesn't report low income, later on in our intake form, we collect whether anybody was receiving any benefits. And if somebody reports that they are receiving any cash assistance or benefits like TANF, it automatically populates low income. So those are a couple of structural things that we put into place that seem to have made a difference. It was a very interesting question somebody had, I think Amanda said, about being uncomfortable asking these questions. And I get that. In fact, my wife is a nurse and a nursing instructor, and she's my age, so she's been at this for a little while. And when she hears from, her charges, people who report to her she's training, that they're not comfortable asking or intervening. Nurses do all kinds of stuff. She, in addition to like training them up and telling them the importance, she also has a flip answer: is that she's comfortable with their being uncomfortable, and they still have to do it and get over it. So I've used that in some of our meetings as well. And yeah, people will or will not divulge these things. I will say that we're going to adapt this form a la the format that Georgia has. I really like the way their FY20 is looking. Could we go to the next slide? So in this next slide, you can kind of see we've got 3 years posted here, including the current year, FY20. And you can look at the third row down, English language learners. You can see how from PY17, from the old data system to the new data system, we dramatically increased the number of people reporting English language learner. Same for low levels of literacy. And in the last column over, you can see the change over time. So even though we haven't addressed this as explicitly between last year and the current year, most of these numbers have gone up. We see a couple things that have gone down compared to the first year, like long-term unemployment. We don't know what that's about, whether people knew what they were asking or whether that's a reflection of the strong economy until a month ago. So we can dive in deeper, but we implemented one strategy and we saw immediate results. And can we click the next slide, please? And in this slide, this is where we're starting our deeper dive and where we're going to try to address things next year. We have a breakout of the number of students who report more than that one basic barrier, one barrier or the other. And you can see that in our first year, where we didn't have any of these conditions in place, 29% of our students reported more than one barrier. Last year, 39%. And this year, based on intake, so this year's not done yet, but I think this data is probably complete. 43% of our students reported more than one barrier. So I think that's the right trend. It certainly is reflective of our students, and with some training on our part, we should be able to push this up. Or, we'll see what it is. We'll feel better about, more certain about the depth of that data. So that's great. Yep.
Thanks, Toby. And now I'm going to ask Kim from Georgia to share her screen with us. And Kim, I just unmuted you. So you'll be able to show us a little bit of the form that you use.
All right. Thanks, Marcella. So a few of the barriers we collect in kind of different ways, like, for example, ELL or low literacy, we collect based on the assessment that students take in their EFL is how we collect those. But the other ones we tend to collect through our intake process. And so one of the things that we got requests for starting last fall was that we create a centralized online intake. And so we began that development in the fall with mocking out what the form would look like. And in that process, we took a very hard look at how we were collecting information because we wanted to do it in the easiest way possible for students to be able to understand. Our initial thinking was that the online intake form would be in place of the paper form. So in other words, students come to us they are attending our orientation and intake sessions, and rather than write on a paper form that then has to be hand entered into our system, this is a way to eliminate some of the data entry time and burden. And so students are entering in the information themselves, and it is basically put into a holding place within our data system that the local program can then pull over into the system. So I believe Marcella is going to send out a link to you all so that you actually can go and try this out for yourselves. But if you want to cheat, you can see that the link is in the address bar on the screen as well. So I just want to show you a couple of things about our new online intake form that we started piloting this past January, not having any idea that the world was going to fall apart. But it's actually been a really good thing for us to have this in place, because as we are looking to doing some registrations at a distance, we've already got this in our pocket. We just need to modify our procedures a little bit in order to make it work. So just to show you a couple of things about the form, we were really pleased to make the form interactive. And that means that when students start putting in information, it can search for their address and populate those fields. We were also pretty pleased that when you enter in your cell phone or an email address, when you complete the form, that our system is able to send a text message. Now, they do have to select their provider, because apparently text messages go out differently over different providers, and we didn't know that when we started this process. But we're pleased to have those kinds of things built into our form. The student, as you can see down here, will hit next, and then it takes them to the next page. Here we're collecting just some basic emergency information. I'm not going to put anything there, but just to show you that they would click next and it goes to the next page. And this is where we begin collecting, I would say, pretty much our standard demographic data elements. So as you can see, you've got race and ethnicity and their highest school grade and their highest educational grade. One of the things that we have built in on this part is when they enter in their birth date, the age it has to match their age. Otherwise, it will send the student an error message, which is pretty nice, so that we can help to have kind of some edit checking there before time. So then on the next page, this is where we really start collecting our barriers. And I wanted to show you that when a student comes in and they select not working but looking for work, this is when the 27-week barrier pops in and asks them that question, so that we can collect that, which is that long-term unemployment question. And then we also worked really hard on low income. So we broke out all of the different public assistance into individual questions. And we have that if they mark one of these within our system, it will automatically select that they are low income. The other thing we put in is, say they skipped all of this stuff. Maybe they don't have TANF or SNAP. We have where they can come in now and they can calculate their low income by entering in their household size. And based upon their answer to the question, whether it's yes or no, about their annual yearly income, it will then come in and it will indicate that they have low income. So the next thing is, once they're done with that part, they can select a site. They can also click on this map link, which takes them to our website, which shows them all of the different programs that we have, so they can select one that's going to work for them. And once they're done, they will submit the form and they get a success message. So they get this, but they also will get either a text message or an email message based upon the data that they entered. And I do want to follow up and say that some of the barriers that are out there, we do not collect through this process. The main one is disabilities. We have, when a student would then after they're done with the form and they've completed it, they sit down with someone who goes over the data with them to make sure that it's correct and that they understood everything. And they do that before they pull the data out of that holding area and pull it into our system. And at that same time, we also complete, well, maybe not at that same time, but after they complete their assessment, then we sit down with them and we go over their student goals and what they hope to achieve with us. And then at that time, we collect whether or not they're disabled, if they're requesting accommodations, And then also, that's when we have their data release and signature. So that's the part we're working out right now as to how to do that at a distance. But we always have our staff members involved in this data collection, especially to confirm that it's correct. So that's it, Marcella. Let's see if I can turn this back over to you, or you can take control.
Yes, I can.
I'll stop sharing.
1 second. Yeah, I got it. So let's go back. And I recognize that it is now 2 p.m. So I want to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time. So rather than doing a few polls and finding out from all of you, if you're all able to stay on for an extra few minutes, and we can do a little bit of Q&A, that would be great. If you need to leave, I acknowledge that, and feel free to drop off. I do want to mention before everyone leaves that we do have a link here to our evaluation that I would love for everyone to please fill out to help us figure out how to improve our webinars. We're always looking for improvement. We do have the Barriers to Employment tip sheet there for you to download. It's also available on our website. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. I didn't see any as we were going through. I think they were all addressed. I can scroll back up. I'll scroll back up quickly and see if there was anything that I missed. But if not, if you do have any questions, please feel free to post those. Sorry, I did see one earlier from John. It said, would you not report ex-offender status for currently incarcerated learners who had recidivated? Larry, I don't know if you have the answer to that.
Yes, hi, Marcella. That's a good question, John. I would say, and I've been conferring with Alan Tucker about your question, that technically, yes, the person, you do the status at intake, and at intake, the person, if they were previously incarcerated and now they're back in corrections, if that's what you're asking, which I think you are, clarify if it's not, I would say that yes, they are an ex-offender, even though they're back in prison. So I would classify them that way, but technically they do meet the definition. It's kind of a tricky area there. I don't see any. Oh, what did you cover me? Okay. Any other questions, Marcella? Or do you see any other ones?
No, I did not see any other as I scrolled back.
Okay, given that we are out of time, what I would like to ask you to do, first off, if you do have a question, just email it to me or to Alan or Jay at Octay at our emails, or you can also just send it to the NRS mailbox, nrs@aar.org, and we'll answer it. And I was interested in strategies that you use. If you have something a strategy that wasn't mentioned, or one that you also do that might be helpful to other states, to send me or someone at Octay, Alan or Jay, that your suggestion, and we would like to hear from you, particularly about one of the issues that somebody brought up, I believe Scott from Washington, that some providers are reluctant to ask the barriers because they don't have any services to help the student. So I think it's a little awkward to say, oh, I have this particular issue, but we can't do anything about it. So if you have a strategy on how to deal with that, or maybe one of our presenters do, and also that sometimes it can seem a little offensive to ask some of those questions to some of the learners. I know that was a little bit addressed. So those are the kind of strategies I think that would really be helpful. So if you have an idea, and we're out of time, I won't belabor that, but please do send it to us. And I just want to remind you of the resources we do have available. Of course, the NRSTA guide, Technical Assistance Guide, is available online on our website. That answers all the accountability questions and all the rules that as you're aware of. And there is a little tool, written document that accompanies this webinar that is in the resources box. that you can access, and it's also available on our website, and there's the link to it. So with that, I will thank you all for attending. Please do the evaluation, and we'll see you at our next webinar, I guess. Marcella, anything else to add?
No, that's all. Thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you again soon. Please stay safe.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Oh, sorry, there was a question. Sorry, Kathy, thank you for that question. This will be available on the NRS website, as all of our webinars are. Thanks so much.